What would happen if a CEO ordered a meal at his own restaurant and discovered the sound of someone crying from behind the kitchen? On a crisp early autumn morning, Ethan Cole sat quietly in an old pickup truck parked in the lot of a small restaurant bearing the sign, Hearthstone Grill. It was the seventh location in a chain of restaurants he had spent 12 years building from the ground up. From a humble food truck, Ethan had transformed his idea of home-style comfort meals into a network of 13 restaurants spanning across several Midwestern states. But lately, something felt off. Though regional management reports continued to arrive with numbers that looked picture-perfect, the increasingly lukewarm customer feedback and a vague yet unsettling anonymous email Ethan received 2 weeks ago had planted a seed of doubt he could no longer ignore. Your branch is slowly rotting from the inside, and unless you see it with your own eyes, you'll never truly know what's hiding behind those employee smiles. Having once been betrayed by a co-founder who sold customer data to a competitor, Ethan knew too well that not everything shows up in reports. Some truths exist only in weary eyes, trembling voices, or suppressed gestures. So instead of calling a meeting like he usually would, he chose a quieter path, to become an anonymous guest. He grew out his beard, traded his polished suits for a worn hoodie, scuffed shoes, and thick-framed glasses that concealed the sharp gaze of someone who once led hundreds. Today his name was Eli, just an ordinary man grabbing lunch alone. As Ethan pushed open the glass door, he immediately sensed something had changed. The space still bore the same furnishings he had personally approved from the first design draft, but the warm, welcoming atmosphere, once the soul of Hearthstone, seemed to have thinned. The counters were still tidy and the ceiling lights still cast their familiar golden glow, but the greeting was unexpectedly cold. No smiles, no nods from the host stand. Ethan found his own seat by the window and waited in silence. A young woman approached his table a few minutes later. On her chest, a worn brass name tag read Emma. She gave a slight bow, a faint smile brushing her lips but never reaching her eyes, which were marked with deep fatigue. "Good afternoon. Would you like something to drink first?" Her voice was polite but lifeless, as if she had recited that line hundreds of times that day with no feeling left behind it. Ethan looked at her more closely. Her eyes didn't dart around, but they didn't linger either. They were the eyes of someone trying to stay balanced in a headwind. "A black coffee, please." "Thank you," he replied simply, leaning back in his seat, his gaze following her as she moved between the tables. Emma moved with a practiced speed that seemed more mechanical than fluid. She took notes, poured water, cleared plates, and responded to calls from 3 tables at once. Her every step was like the rhythm of a machine running well past capacity. Ethan noted everything in a small notebook tucked into his jacket pocket, a habit from his early days in business. To the average customer, she might appear hardworking, but to Ethan, she resembled a light bulb on the brink, still glowing, still functioning, but close to shattering if no one noticed. When Emma returned with the coffee, Ethan caught a glimpse of a faint bruise on her wrist as her sleeve slid up. He didn't ask, just nodded and said, "Thank you, you're doing a good job." She flinched slightly, surprised, and a hint of caution flickered in her eyes as if she wasn't used to receiving encouragement. Then, for the first time since he walked in, Ethan saw a genuine smile briefly break across her face before she quickly turned away. He took a sip of the coffee, bitter. Not just because it had been brewed poorly, but because of the growing unease swelling in his chest. He hadn't pinpointed the exact problem yet, but he could feel it. Subtle and quiet like the steam rising from his cup, fragile yet impossible to ignore. And that was precisely why he needed to stay, because he knew that wherever silent unrest existed, someone had to be there to watch quietly and act when the moment was right. As Ethan set his coffee cup down, a man's voice rang out from the kitchen, harsh and laced with anger. "Emma, you're late again. Where's the order for table 12? The sharp bark of his words echoed all the way to the dining area, causing a nearby couple to turn their heads in surprise. Emma froze for half a second, still holding a tray of water. "Yes, sir. I'll bring it out right away," she answered quickly, trying to sound composed, though the heaviness in her eyes betrayed her effort. Ethan quietly observed everything, noting the man's name, Brent, from the embroidered logo on his apron. Brent had a stocky build, a square jaw, and a permanent scowl etched into his features. No one in the restaurant dared speak back. No one raised a word. Only Emma moved faster, as if slowing down even a beat might bring something far worse than being yelled at. A small child at the table near the window accidentally spilled a glass of water. The mother fumbled for napkins. Emma rushed over, knelt down, cleaned the mess quickly, and smiled at the child. It was the only moment that day when her smile seemed genuine. But as she stood and turned her back to the kitchen, Ethan caught sight of Brent standing there, arms crossed, face flushed, his jaw clenched tight as if he was silently tallying another offense. That was not the look of a manager, but the glare of someone who punishes when no one is watching. Not long after, when Ethan's burger finally arrived, Emma quietly placed the plate in front of him without a word. She avoided his gaze. "Thank you," Ethan said gently. She simply nodded and walked away, but he noticed the faint tremble in her hands. A person only trembles like that when they fear something happening again and again, with no one to stand up for them. Just then, a family seated behind Ethan began complaining. "We've been waiting over 25 minutes. That girl said right away, but how long is that supposed to mean?" The man's voice was sharp like a blade. Ethan heard every word. Another employee passing by turned toward the kitchen and called, "Brent, the guests at table 6 have been waiting too long." Brent came out, scanning the room with a hard stare. He offered no greeting, no apology, just barked, "Emma, where's the order for table 6? You fall asleep back there?" The whole restaurant fell momentarily silent. Emma, standing behind the counter with both hands still preparing drinks, responded softly, "I sent that order to the kitchen 10 minutes ago." Brent didn't look at her. He just sneered and turned his back, as if he had just won a game. Ethan placed his knife down on the plate. That wasn't just unprofessionalism. It was the symptom of something far more toxic. A culture of humiliation, of undermining dignity, of unchecked cruelty festering beneath the surface. One thing Ethan had learned early in his career: a bad CEO won't sink an entire company, but a toxic manager can destroy a team from within. And this time, Brent wasn't just draining Emma's spirit, he was poisoning the entire restaurant with the stagnant heaviness of a forgotten warehouse. Ethan couldn't intervene just yet, at least not now. He needed more time, needed to hear more, to trace the issue to its root before taking action. Then, just as he bit into his first piece of burger, a sound floated in from the kitchen. Soft at first, muffled, then gradually clearer. The sound of someone sobbing. Ethan stopped, setting his fork down. That sound wasn't from the AC, nor from dishes clattering together. It was the sound of a soul pushed past its breaking point. A cry he'd heard too many times in his life. From himself. On the night he walked away from his old company after being betrayed by his partner. From the very first employee of Hearthstone after a customer yelled at her for no reason. And now, from Emma. All the signs were there. Ethan knew them better than anyone. And they pointed to a truth he could no longer ignore. This place was rotting from the inside, and unless someone stepped in to fix it, it would collapse. Reaching for the now cold coffee, Ethan leaned back in his chair, eyes locked on the kitchen door. He was no longer just a curious customer. From the moment that cry echoed through the room, he was Ethan Cole, founder, leader, and the only one who could rewrite the fate of this place. The muffled sound from the kitchen refused to fade. Instead, it echoed through Ethan like a warning bell. It was not the sound of clattering dishes or kitchen machinery, but of someone desperately trying to silence their despair by holding back sobs in a place where no one cared enough to listen. He slowly placed his now cold coffee cup on the table, his eyes fixed on the stainless steel door that led into the kitchen, a space off limits to customers. But today, he was not just a customer. Today, he needed to see it for himself. No one stopped him as Ethan gently pushed open the door and stepped past the line separating the warmly lit dining area from the hot, grease-scented depths of the kitchen. He stood silently in the corner, near a loudly whirring dishwasher that still couldn't drown out the sound coming from a small back room where the freezer and spice racks were kept. There, Emma stood with her face turned to the wall, hands trembling as they covered her face, tears falling onto the gray tile floor forming faint streaks. Brent stood only a few steps away, arms crossed, face flushed, his voice as cold as steel. "How many times do I have to tell you? This isn't a place for daydreaming. If you can't handle pressure, maybe you should quit. We need people who know how to work, not people who know how to cry." Ethan clenched his fists. His knuckles whitened, but he stayed still, not stepping forward. He wanted to see, would anyone else speak up? Two other kitchen staff, an older man and a slim young guy, stood by the prep table, pretending to stay busy but clearly aware of everything happening. No one moved. No one said a word. It was like a scene from a play that had been repeated so many times it lost its impact, where the role of the humiliated was always played by Emma, and the audience had grown too used to the ending to react. Then, Emma's voice broke through, soft but clear. "I'm not quitting. I just want to work in peace. I've been standing since 7 this morning without a single break. I just need to breathe." The words, though quiet, hit Ethan like a punch to the chest. What he saw in her eyes wasn't weakness. It was a kind of strength that had been silent for far too long. Unable to hold back any longer, Ethan stepped out from the shadows. His voice was calm but steady. "Is there something going on here?" Brent turned around, stunned. The veins on his neck relaxed as if he'd been caught red-handed. "Oh, nothing serious," he stammered. "Just a little misunderstanding between the shift lead and a staff member." Emma flinched when she saw him. Her eyes briefly met Ethan's, not recognizing who the man at the door truly was. "I'm sorry, I'm just a little overwhelmed," she said softly, still wiping her tears with the back of her hand. Ethan didn't respond to her right away. He turned to Brent, his expression composed but sharp. "She clearly needs a break. Why didn't you let her take a few minutes?" Brent shrugged, his tone acidic. "We're short-staffed. If everyone took breaks when they felt tired, this place would have shut down a long time ago." Ethan's expression didn't change. "No, it shuts down when people are treated like machines and stop feeling respected. That's the real reason." Brent opened his mouth to object, but another voice cut in from behind. "Emma hasn't taken a single break since morning. She hasn't even had a chance to drink water." It was the young guy, Connor, who had been washing dishes in silence. Brent snapped around. "Keep your mouth shut, Connor. Just do your job." Ethan looked at Connor. The young man's eyes held hesitation, but he stood his ground. "And who's responsible for making sure people can do their jobs in an environment like this?" Ethan asked, his tone no longer soft. Brent began to step back, visibly uneasy. I'm just doing my job." Ethan gave a tight, humorless smile. "Then maybe you should take a long look at what that job has become. Because if I were the one running this place, and you clearly don't know who I am, the way you do things would be exactly why I'd fire you." Emma still stood there, her eyes watery, but no longer crying. "I'm fine now. I'll go back to work," she murmured. Ethan studied her for a moment, then nodded. "You should take a break. That's not a suggestion, it's a recommendation." Brent looked like he was about to argue again, but Ethan raised his hand firmly. "She's taking a break, right now." Emma hesitated for a few seconds, then walked out of the kitchen, leaving behind the heavy air like a stone dropped in water. Ethan stood still, hands in his pockets, eyes locked on Brent. His final words, spoken as he turned to leave, were as soft as a breeze but sharp as a blade. "I'll be back, and next time, I won't be here to ask." The next morning, the sky was cloaked in a pale gray, dew still lingering on car roofs and soaking into the grass along the roadside. Ethan returned to the restaurant, still wearing the disguise of Eli, the quiet customer, though his eyes now carried more than passive observation. They reflected the gaze of someone ready to lift the veil of truth. He arrived early before official opening hours. The morning air moved slowly, not in the rush of the previous day, and in that stillness, he saw everything more clearly. Connor was the first person Ethan noticed when he walked in. The young man stood in the kitchen, holding a knife over a pile of onions, his eyes red, not from the onions, but perhaps from a sleepless night. Ethan walked behind the counter silently, looping around to the prep area where he could watch the whole team at work. Emma was already there too, looking more tired than the day before, but still neat, composed, and, most importantly, still smiling. She was wiping down the counter, straightening menus, and lining up silverware trays with meticulous care, as if trying to preserve order in a world full of quiet chaos. Ethan waited until she walked past, then gently called, "Emma, could we talk for a moment?" She flinched slightly but nodded. "Just a few minutes, I need to prep for the lunch rush." Ethan gave a slight nod. "I understand. I sense you're carrying more on your shoulders than what a shift usually demands. Emma bit her lip, glanced around, then lowered her voice. It's not always like this. Just when Brent's on shift, everyone's tense. Ethan nodded again, saying nothing. He's under a lot of pressure, I get that. But the way he puts that pressure on others, it's not right. Ethan leaned in slightly, eyes meeting hers. What about the others? Is anyone supporting you? Emma hesitated. Then, after a few seconds, she softly said, Connor. He's the only one who's ever spoken up for me, even though he's scared Brent will punish him for it. Yesterday, you saw it. Ethan remained silent, eyes lowering in thought. A probationary employee like Connor had dared to speak up in a high-pressure kitchen, something even the longtime staff didn't dare do. That wasn't just bravery. That was integrity that couldn't be bent. The kitchen door swung open. Brent walked in, his face unreadable, not bothering to greet anyone. Connor immediately lowered his head, hands trembling as he stacked plates. Brent walked past him without a word, but the look he gave was sharp enough to freeze the boy in place. Emma quickly turned away to get water for the first guest of the day. Ethan stood still, sensing the oppressive power radiating through the room. Lunchtime hit fast. Customers streamed in, orders flying, pans sizzling, the cash register beeping, kitchen bells ringing nonstop. Emma began to tire. Sweat soaked the back of her shirt, her hair clung to her neck. Still, she kept a polite tone, bent to pick up napkins, asked if customers wanted more water. But when an elderly man, wearing a checkered shirt, complained that his eggs were overcooked, it pushed things to the edge. You don't know how to cook, do you? He snapped. Emma bowed slightly. I'm sorry, I'll have the kitchen remake it right away. Before she could turn, Brent burst from the kitchen, his face blazing red. How could you mess this up? Emma, how many times have I told you, check the plate before it goes out? His voice boomed across the restaurant. Several guests looked up. Emma stood frozen, her face pale. Connor ran from the kitchen but stopped halfway, and then Ethan stood up. The screech of his chair against the floor echoed sharply. He walked into the center of the dining room, pulled his wallet from his pocket, and opened it in front of Brent. That's enough. I'm not just a customer. I'm Ethan Cole, the man who built the Hearthstone chain from the ground up. And you, Brent, are the reason I left headquarters to come back here. The room fell silent. Emma's mouth opened in shock. Connor stood still as stone. Brent stepped back, then forward again, growling, You're kidding, right? Ethan didn't answer. He simply pulled out a card from his wallet and held it high. The Hearthstone logo gleamed under the light. You know I'm not kidding. Brent's face turned pale, and for the first time since he walked in, he was speechless. Ethan turned to Emma. You did well. Starting today, everything changes. Then he looked straight at Connor, the only one brave enough to speak up yesterday, and nodded. And you, I want to talk to you after your shift. The atmosphere in the restaurant after Ethan's unexpected revelation felt like a current had just surged through a still pond. Everything was eerily quiet, but beneath the surface, something volatile was stirring. Brent stood frozen in place, his face flushed, as if he had just been slapped, not by a physical blow, but by a strike at the core of the authority he once took for granted in this space. The staff around him, even those who had previously avoided confrontation, could no longer conceal their astonishment. Their eyes were fixed on Ethan, as if they were witnessing something they had only dared to dream of, someone powerful enough to confront the very darkness they had grown used to living with. Brent was the first to speak, his voice no longer sharp. I didn't know. If I had known it was you. Ethan cut him off, not loudly, but with a clarity that left no room for misunderstanding. The problem isn't whether you knew who I was. The problem is that if I had been anyone else, a regular customer, a new employee, or even a stranger, you would have treated them exactly the same. That is what's unacceptable. Brent opened his mouth but said nothing. For the first time in years, he knew that any excuse would only make him look worse. Emma stood behind the counter, still holding a tray of water, barely able to breathe. Her eyes met Ethan's with a mix of disbelief and fragile hope. Connor had long left the kitchen and now stood beside her, gripping the edge of his apron like he was trying to steady a tremor inside. Nearby customers whispered to each other, and a few took out their phones to record. as if sensing that this moment was something entirely different. Not found on the menu, not printed on a receipt, but woven into the way a leader chooses to protect what he has built. "Office," Ethan said, his eyes locked on Brent. "We need to talk, in private." Brent walked away, his steps heavy like dragging chains. Ethan followed, but before disappearing behind the kitchen door, he turned to Emma and Connor. "I'll be back after the shift. We have things to discuss." The door closed behind them, and what was said inside remained between a few, but the outcome needed no explanation. 15 minutes later, Brent emerged without his apron, carrying a cardboard box, his eyes avoiding everyone else's. No one saw him off. No one asked questions. He walked out through the back door like a ghost expelled from what used to be his tiny kingdom. Ethan stood in the center of the service area, sleeves rolled up, shirt damp with sweat, yet his gaze was unwavering as stone. He looked around. No more fear, only anticipation. And he understood. From that moment on, he could no longer just be the CEO. He had to be the one to lead them out of the suffocating days they had endured. "I know today hasn't been easy," Ethan said, his voice calm but not cold. "And I know the blame doesn't lie with just one person. Part of it is mine, for being absent too long, for letting reports replace real observation, for letting numbers hide the pain of real people. But I'm here now, and from today forward, things will be different." No one clapped, no one cheered, but the eyes had changed. They no longer looked down, they no longer avoided contact. Emma lifted her head, and her smile finally reached her eyes. Connor remained silent but nodded, a quiet pledge. And Ethan knew the real work was only just beginning. Night fell like a thick curtain, muffling the clamor of the city outside. Inside the Hearthstone Grill's 7th location, the overhead lights had dimmed, leaving only the warm glow from the kitchen and bar. The tables had been cleaned and neatly arranged, the floor shined to a quiet polish, and at the very last table in the corner, 3 people sat facing one another. Ethan, no longer the cold CEO, but a thoughtful man with an earnest gaze. Emma, her face still marked by fatigue, but her eyes flickering with a fragile new hope. And Connor, slight and reserved, his hands clenched tightly as if to brace himself for a promise he wasn't sure he deserved. Ethan leaned forward on his elbows. He didn't dance around the point. "I want to thank you both. Not for enduring, but for not walking away. What I've witnessed over the past 2 days isn't just a management issue. It's a sign of a workplace losing its soul. And that soul, you two have fought to keep it alive in every way you could." Emma lowered her head, her eyes drifting to the water glass in front of her. I don't know what to say. I didn't think I'd done anything important." Ethan shook his head. "Not everyone can keep smiling while carrying that much weight. Not everyone has the courage to stand by a colleague being humiliated. And Connor," he turned to the young man still looking flustered, "you were the first to speak up when everyone else stayed silent. You didn't just stand up for Emma, you reminded this brand of what it's supposed to stand for." Connor flushed. "I just couldn't stay quiet. I used to work at another restaurant. There, a girl got humiliated by the manager in front of customers and no one said anything. She quit the next day. I didn't want to see that happen again." The room fell quiet for a moment. Only the distant hum of the ice machine could be heard. Ethan nodded slowly. "I used to believe I could run everything through reports and spreadsheets. But today I relearned an old truth, that no data point is more honest than the look in an employee's eyes at the end of their shift." He reached into his pocket and placed a thin stack of papers on the table. "This is the short-term recovery plan I'm enacting at this location. First, I'm staying here until things are stable. Second, I'll be hiring a new manager, someone who knows how to listen and respects their team. And third," Ethan paused, his eyes meeting each of theirs, "I want to promote both of you." Emma's head snapped up. I don't understand?" "Connor, I want you to step into an assistant manager role during this transition. You've shown leadership and responsibility. From now on, you'll help manage the schedule, oversee service operations, and, most importantly, ensure everyone gets their proper breaks." Connor was stunned, then blurted out, "But I've never managed before. I don't have a degree." Ethan smiled. "You've already managed, in the best way possible, not through authority, but through action." Connor slowly nodded, his throat tight. In his eyes, for the first time in a long while, flickered something buried under the weight of survival. Pride. "And you, Emma?" Ethan turned to the young woman, now clasping her hands together. 8 months of work without complaint, always putting the customer first. That deserves more than just thanks. I'm raising your pay and instituting a performance-based bonus system to make sure real effort gets recognized, not just with words. Emma stared at him, stunned. Her lips moved without sound. Finally, she raised a hand to her mouth, trying to catch the tear that had just escaped. Thank you. I didn't think someone like me would be remembered." Ethan tilted his head. "Everyone deserves to be remembered, Emma, especially the ones holding a restaurant together when no one else noticed." As they left the table, the last of the lights dimmed. Connor stayed behind to straighten a few chairs. Emma glanced back at Ethan, no longer the distant boss, but the person who had stood beside her in her darkest hour. "Tomorrow," she said softly. "I'm coming in a little earlier, to start fresh, but this time, not with my head down." Ethan nodded. "I'll be here early too. And this time, I'm not sitting at a table. I'll be right next to you, behind the counter." In just a few short days after that night, the Hearthstone Grill's 7th location was no longer the suffocating place of shouting voices, fearful glances, and invisible footsteps. Everything changed, not in a loud upheaval, but quietly, like morning sunlight slipping through a curtain, gentle, yet making people feel that life was returning. Ethan kept his word. He didn't go back to headquarters, didn't send a deputy to manage on his behalf, and didn't supervise from afar. He stayed, standing behind the counter with Emma each morning, wiping tables, learning to enter orders, even occasionally delivering water to customers himself. At first, staff were bewildered by it, but soon they began to smile when they saw him, not out of fear, but because for the first time, their leader was right there with them, no longer just a name on the top of an email or a face on a poster. Denise, the new manager, arrived at the end of the week, a middle-aged woman with neat curls, a deep voice, and the calm eyes of someone who had endured more than most. She didn't ask too many questions, only requested 10 minutes with each employee to listen. "Not because I want to test you, I just want to know. What exhausts you most here, and what makes you stay?" The way she asked was enough for people to believe. This time they were not being managed, but understood. Emma received a raise in the first week. Every time she smiled, the entire room brightened. Connor was still shy about his new title as assistant manager, but when he rearranged the schedule to ensure a single mother could have Sundays off, everyone knew he was born to lead. Ethan didn't micromanage the details. He let Connor coordinate, let Emma contribute ideas for the new menu, and let Denise propose a training program. But he was always there, listening, nodding, asking questions, and fixing things with them when necessary. And then, the biggest shift didn't come from within. It came from the outside. Regulars began returning. One elderly woman said, "I don't know what happened, but this place feels like it used to, where people remember my name and bring brown sugar for my coffee without me asking." Children were given coloring pages and crayons. Young people no longer sighed over slow service because now everything came faster. Not because of better equipment, but because people were serving with genuine kindness. One late afternoon, as Ethan prepared to return to headquarters after 3 weeks, Emma came to the door, still holding a coffee pot. "You're really leaving?" she asked, her eyes a little wistful. Ethan nodded. "I have to. Because if I stay here too long, people might go back to working for me, instead of working for themselves." Emma smiled. "I just wanted to say, this place really is different now. And not just because Brent was fired, but because we know someone listened and someone was willing to start over with us." Ethan glanced around the room. Denise was training a new hire on how to respond when a dish was returned. Connor was setting up a rotating time-off schedule for the team. A family was snapping a selfie with their server, and behind the counter, the assignment board had a new line. "Most complimented employee of the month, Emma." He turned to look at her, the girl who once cried behind a stainless steel door, now standing tall, pouring coffee with steady hands, and offering warm smiles to customers. "You deserve that," he said, "and better." As he stepped out the door, Ethan looked back one last time. The glass door closed behind him, reflecting the image of a restaurant he once thought he had lost. But the truth was, It was never lost. It just needed to be heard, respected, and led the right way. Ethan opened his car door, but instead of starting the engine immediately, he took out his phone and sent a brief message to his assistant. For the next executive meeting, give me the first 15 minutes. I need to share a story about a girl named Emma, a boy named Connor, and what happens when a CEO walks into his own restaurant without a business card. Then, he drove off, not fast, not hurried, but with a promise fulfilled in his heart and an organization beginning to heal from the smallest of things. Not every organization collapses because of wrong decisions made at the top. Sometimes it decays from within, from silence, pressure, and the stripping away of dignity at the lowest levels. A true leader does not only appear on stage but must be present where it is hardest, listening to the quietest voices. If you believe that real change begins with understanding people, please like this video, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more powerful true stories, and leave a comment with the phrase "truly listening" to help spread this message.